Hello fellow sim racers. Today's video is all about direct drive wheels, and specifically how some of my preconceptions about direct drive wheels were a bit wide of the mark. So to start off with, throughout this video is some footage I captured testing out the new AI opponent selector in Race Room, which is very fun, but 60 cars in different classes at Monza does get a little bit crowded at times, as you'll see. And before we get into the thick of it, a quick word about my setup so you know where I'm coming from. At the beginning of December, I traded in my trusty Thrustmaster T300 for an open sim wheel system. This uses the SimuCube force feedback controller, Ioni servo driver and the 20Nm midge servo motor with the BIS-C encoder. That may sound like word salad, but to put it simply, this is the general specification provided by the likes of SimTech Racing and Sim Racing Bay. So, what have I learned? When people discuss direct drive wheels, the conversation quickly turns to how much torque the wheelbase can deliver, and that's understandable. Consumer grade wheels like the G29 and the T300 deliver maybe 2 or 3 Nm of turning force, while direct drive systems can deliver 10 times that amount, which is, well, significant. To put it in context, the peak wheel forces in most road cars that have power steering range between say 3 and 8 Nm, but a fast racing car from the late 80s with lots of aero and no steering assistance may reach peak figures as high as 30 Nm. So obviously you have the ability to replicate those kind of forces with a direct drive wheel, if you want to. But the whole point of force feedback is to give the driver lots of information about how the car's behaving. And that means a force feedback wheel must provide information about the weight of the steering, but also communicate other information that would normally be felt more prominently through the seat or with other senses, such as the movement of the car, G-forces and other information about what the tyres are doing. And for me, that's where direct drive really comes into its own. Once you get over the, man, I can make the steering really heavy factor, what really impresses is the response time, or how quickly the wheel can deliver those forces. Details in the force feedback feel much crisper and more defined. Everything feels, for want of a better word, tighter. And that leads me on to my next point. Okay, so that's an overstatement, but not much of one. The difference in rotational speed between a belt-driven consumer wheelbase and a direct drive wheel is considerable. And when you combine that with the greater torque, you end up with a steering wheel that's really very good at trying to self-align. So when you push a little bit too hard and the back end starts to step out, you have 2 advantages over a consumer wheel. First of all, you feel the change in grip in a more dramatic way, thanks to the greater dynamic range, meaning that you can react quicker. And secondly, you have a wheel that naturally wants to snap back to center, which makes applying opposite lock easier and slightly faster. In short, catching an errant slide is much more intuitive with a direct drive wheel. Much is said about the need for a strong rig to support a direct drive wheel, and that's absolutely correct. However, strength isn't the only factor here, and if anything, rigidity may be more important. At the moment, I'm using a Next Level Racing F1 GT chassis, and as you can see from the footage, the wheel plate deflects a lot under load. This means that the chassis itself is acting as a damping spring, countering the movements of the wheel, and ultimately slightly diminishing the fidelity of the force feedback. Now, the wheel deck is supported on 40mm box section steel, and it's strong enough to jump up and down on. However, the torque of the wheel is more than capable of flexing the uprights. I will likely have to move over to an aluminium extrusion-based rig in the near future to combat this problem, and this is something worth considering if you're going to make the move to a more powerful wheelbase. I think it's fair to say that some sims are easier than others to get working well with a direct drive wheel, and for the most part you're going to have to get used to the idea that you're going to have to alter config files to get the force feedback behaving well on a direct drive setup. This is largely because, while sims calculate wonderful clean force feedback data, they then process that data to help it play well on the infinitely more numerous consumer wheels out there. Thankfully, in most cases, this can be dealt with simply by opening up a config file in a text editor and tweaking the values of a few lines. Moreover, information about this is plentiful around the web. Recently, developers seem to be catching on and are beginning to include these functions in their user interfaces. That all being said, some sims can be a bit more challenging to get force feedback that feels natural with a direct drive wheel. Race Room, for example, is notoriously tricky in this regard, and I must admit it took a lot of tweaking to get rid of a sort of lumpy feel. But eventually I got things working and now it feels great, which leads nicely into my final point. While that may sound like it contradicts what I've just been saying, bear with me here. Sure, there's a bit of tweaking needed to get everything behaving the way you'd like, but none of it's complex. When I eventually caved in and bought the wheel, I was expecting to need to do a huge amount of reading and experimentation. From the snippets I'd read online, direct drive wheels were complex and getting them working well needed some serious wizardry. But that couldn't be further from the truth. I had the system set up in less than 30 minutes and was racing almost right away. Tweaking Sims to suit did take a little bit of experimentation and some googling, but by and large it wasn't a painful or complex task. And on that note, I can thoroughly recommend William Marsh Sim Racing Paddock's guide to setting up the OSW with various sims. As usual, I've put a link in the video description. So that just about covers my main misconceptions about what owning a direct drive wheel will be like. I'll be reviewing the SimTech Racing OSW kit at some point in the future, but in the next video I'll be taking a look at the Assetto Corsa Competizione Build 5 and the Emil Frey Jaguar. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And if you think the video will be helpful for others, then please consider sharing it. As always, thank you for donating your precious free time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.